Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood before a sea of microphones and cameras, sunlight glinting off the bronze trim of his military uniform. The announcement he was about to make would not only shake Burkina Faso, it would ripple across the continent. "Ladies and gentlemen of Burkina Faso," he began, voice steady and resolute, "it is unacceptable that in a land so rich in resources, our people still sleep under leaking roofs or none at all. That ends today. From this moment forward, the state will embark on the largest public housing project in our nation's history. And it will be completely free." The crowd erupted. Mothers wept. Fathers clapped and sang. From the northern drylands to the bustling markets of Ouagadougou, hope ignited like wildfire. This wasn't just a promise. It was a revolution. The program, dubbed Dignité par le logement, dignity through housing, had one goal: to provide every low-income family with a modern, solar-powered, structurally sound home within 5 years. Each estate would include schools, clinics, clean water access, and green zones for community farming. Foreign contractors were banned. Only local engineers, artisans, and construction crews would be employed, empowering citizens while keeping the economy circulating internally. Traoré had done the math. Instead of exporting gold, the state would use a portion of its mining revenue to fund construction. It would reduce slums, cut unemployment, and stabilize communities prone to radicalization. But while the people cheered, a darker reaction brewed elsewhere. In an air-conditioned high-rise overlooking downtown Ouagadougou, a group of elite real estate moguls watched the broadcast in silence. Their expressions were not of awe, but contempt. "He's signing our death warrant," muttered Alhaji Suleiman, a Nigerian developer whose private estate projects catered to diplomats and expatriates. "Who will buy our overpriced villas when peasants are getting 3-bedroom houses for free?" "Free is unsustainable," snapped Mark Duval, a Franco-Burkinabe property magnate whose company had lobbied for years to privatize public lands. "The country will collapse under the weight of populism. Unless—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the room understood. For years, the real estate elite had operated like shadow rulers, buying land for pennies through corrupt officials, building high-rises with substandard materials, and selling them for astronomical prices. Now, with Traoré's free housing program, they were losing buyers, political leverage, and profit. They called themselves Le Cercle de, the Steel Circle. And from that moment, their mission was clear: stop Traoré by any means necessary. But how do you kill a dream without turning its dreamer into a martyr? The first strategy was economic. They tried to flood the housing sector with foreign-funded projects, offering luxury housing for less in major cities. They bribed mayors to slow down state land allocation and pressured banks to deny loans to local builders associated with the government's housing scheme. Nothing worked. Next came smear campaigns. Sponsored articles popped up in West African media, calling the program unsustainable populism, state socialism, or a political stunt with no financial backing. Still, the construction sites expanded across the country, managed by young engineers freshly trained under a new national housing corps. By the end of the first year, over 14,000 families had received keys to their new homes. Mothers no longer had to choose between rent and food. Children studied at night using solar lanterns. National pride soared. But so did the anger of the Steel Circle. In secret meetings in Abidjan, Lagos, and Dubai, they explored assassination. 3 attempts were made, each one foiled by Traoré's ultra-loyal counterintelligence team. The captain, known for his simplicity and Spartan discipline, had grown increasingly wary. He changed his daily schedule frequently. He carried his own phone. And he trusted few. His enemies adapted. If they couldn't kill him directly, they would destroy him symbolically. The plan was diabolical. They would bribe corrupt officials in the Ministry of Works and Housing to approve fake construction materials, cheap cement, brittle rods, and porous bricks, then discreetly substitute them at select building sites. Once enough homes were built with the defective materials, they would orchestrate a collapse. Not only would people die, but Traoré would be blamed for cutting corners. To make the deception airtight, they planted insiders in procurement offices, monitoring every shipment of material. Fake inspection reports were created. Real engineers who raised concerns were either silenced or transferred. The goal? Create a disaster big enough to drown the dream. Meanwhile, the media arm of the cartel prepared a parallel campaign. They funded dozens of fake advocacy accounts on social media to stir public skepticism. Journalists were paid to write hit pieces titled Traoré's Homes of Death and Why Free Can Cost Lives. None of this was accidental. It was orchestrated panic. And it was just the beginning. As bulldozers roared, bricks were laid, and families rejoiced, a hidden danger was creeping into the foundations of their hope. And somewhere, in the flickering candlelight of a half-built home in Zone 9, a young woman named Aisha Soar was noticing something very wrong with the soil beneath her feet. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had grown used to pressure. But this was different. It wasn't a rebel incursion in the north or a political standoff in the capital. It was something more poisonous, more invisible, a war waged in boardrooms and cocktail parties, behind dark-tinted glasses and sharper tongues. His decision to offer free housing to citizens had made him a hero to the poor, but an enemy to the powerful. He understood the weight of his actions. What he didn't expect was how deeply the tentacles of greed ran. In the presidential intelligence briefings, something alarming had surfaced. Foreign real estate lobbies were funding West African think tanks and NGOs to discredit Burkina Faso's housing model. Sponsored papers titled, "The Fragile State Economics of Free Housing," were being pushed into regional policy forums. American and French media started running stories questioning the sustainability of Traoré's socialist turn. It wasn't random. His housing policy had triggered a silent rebellion, not from the streets, but from men in tailored suits who had lost access to government land, kickbacks, and inflated contracts. "They've turned you into an ideological virus," his top intelligence officer told him one night. "Other African leaders are watching you, and they're scared their own people will demand the same." The officer handed him a red folder stamped confidential. Inside were photos, maps, and transaction logs. "They met in Accra last month," he explained. "CEOs from 5 major real estate corporations, 3 foreign-backed, 2 local. They're the ones behind the Steel Circle. And they've moved from sabotage to elimination." Ibrahim leaned back, unfazed. "They already tried. 3 times. Yes, but they're getting desperate. Their companies are bleeding. One lost $12 million in just 6 months. Then came the dossier's most chilling part. The cartel had bribed high-ranking officials inside the Ministry of Works and Housing, those responsible for verifying the quality of construction materials. Traoré stared at the report. "Fake materials? On our estates?" "Yes, Captain. And not everywhere. Just enough sites to cause a few deadly collapses. Their aim is to fabricate a national tragedy and pin it on you." Traoré clenched his jaw. These weren't just numbers. These were lives. Families. Children who had finally found safety after years in slums or mud huts. "They're not just attacking me," he said coldly. "They're declaring war on the people." He called an emergency closed-door session with his inner circle. Phones were locked away. No devices were allowed inside. The meeting room was swept for surveillance. There were 12 people in the room: engineers, legal experts, intelligence officers, and 3 trusted military aides. On a projection screen, images of hollowed steel rods and expired cement bags appeared. "These are the materials being funneled into Zone 9, Zone 6B, and Zone 12D, Traoré said. "Most were smuggled in under fake labels and signed off by our own staff." He paused. "We have traitors in this government." Silence fell. "From now on, we conduct parallel inspections. Randomized. No prior notice. And I want whistleblower protection protocols enforced immediately." He pointed to the map. "We're going to find every weak spot, every fake brick, and every coward who sold our people's safety for a suitcase of money." That night, while much of the country slept peacefully in their new homes, a different operation began. Teams of young engineers and military logistics officers were dispatched in unmarked vehicles. Undercover units infiltrated material depots and transportation hubs. Meanwhile, an encrypted message was sent to a woman in Bobo Dioulasso, one of the last truly independent engineers in the National Housing Corps. Her name was Aisha Soor. She had flagged discrepancies weeks earlier when materials delivered didn't match her blueprints. No one listened. One supervisor told her to keep quiet if you want to keep your job. But she refused. When Traoré's coded message reached her, it said only this: check the roots beneath your feet. What you find will determine the future of our nation. Aisha knew what it meant. The next day, disguised as a routine site supervisor, she began soil testing, rod measurement, and tensile strength evaluations in Zone 9. She was methodical. She documented everything. She saw how easily fake cement crumbled in her fingers when mixed, how rods bent unnaturally under pressure. She took samples, photos, voice recordings, and then she disappeared. She was last seen heading toward the engineer's lodge in the Zone 9 complex. 2 workers said she got a strange phone call before slipping out, never to return. When Traoré heard the news, his face didn't change, but his heart tightened. He remembered what she had once said in an interview on national TV: "We are not just building homes. We are rebuilding dignity. We are repairing the soul of Burkina Faso." Now that soul was under threat from within. Zone 9 had become a symbol of progress. It was the largest of the free housing sites, with over 1,200 homes nearing completion. Families were already preparing to move in. Children visited the playgrounds after school. Vendors set up early near the gates, hoping to find customers among the builders. From the outside, it looked like a miracle of development. But beneath the surface, literally, something was wrong. And now Aisha Soor, the only one who had dared to ask questions, was missing. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stared at her last field report. Handwritten notes had been scanned and encrypted by her assistant before she vanished. Her language was clinical but urgent. Core sampling at building block G shows cement density at 30% below national safety code. Steel rods appear corroded, likely recycled waste from informal Chinese smelting factories. Foundation composition lacks structural binders. Failure is inevitable under prolonged rainfall or vibration. The words hit him like bullets. Traoré called in Colonel Naba, head of National Engineering Oversight. How many of these homes were built with this garbage? Naba, a man with gray-streaked hair and a permanent frown, replied without looking up. At least 800 units across 4 zones. Possibly more. We're still verifying. How did this pass inspection? It didn't. The inspections were faked. By who? We suspect a procurement chain involving 3 deputy directors, 1 site supervisor, and a construction firm owned by the son of a former minister. All of them received sudden wire transfers in the past 3 months. Traoré paced the room slowly, his boots echoing on the tiled floor of the presidential office. For the first time since the program began, he considered halting construction. But then he remembered the faces, the joy of mothers clutching house keys like gold, the pride in fathers who no longer feared eviction, the laughter of children playing on solid ground for the first time in their lives. This was bigger than concrete. It was about confidence. In the state. In justice. In the future. We don't stop, he said firmly. We fix it from inside. But fixing meant confronting enemies who didn't wear uniforms or wave flags. They wore suits. They shook hands. They smiled on TV. He ordered an independent audit of all housing materials. The team would include military engineers, students from technical universities, and respected community elders. This move was risky. It meant bypassing his own ministries. But he didn't trust them anymore. In the coming weeks, drone footage revealed even more inconsistencies. Certain homes had roofing tiles that broke under mild pressure. Some wall bricks soaked up water like sponges, weakening structure integrity. Deliveries labeled as reinforced steel were actually rusted rebars wrapped in fresh coating. Traoré knew this was beyond neglect. It was deliberate sabotage. Meanwhile, the Steel Circle pushed forward with their next move, disinformation. In Abidjan and Dakar, a communications firm was paid over $2 million to orchestrate a media campaign against Traoré's housing program. They recruited influencers, journalists, and foreign housing experts, to give interviews claiming the free homes were death traps, ideologically reckless, and an insult to sustainable urban planning. Articles emerged on West African blogs and major outlets alike. How Burkina Faso's free housing model endangers the poor. Is Captain Traoré building homes or tombs? Inside the political propaganda of free housing. It worked. Within weeks, radio phone-ins and WhatsApp groups buzzed with fear. Rumors spread that dozens had already died in secret building collapses. Conspiracy theories took root. The timing couldn't have been worse, because in the heart of Zone 9, under a sky heavy with clouds, the inevitable happened. Building Block G collapsed. The boom was heard for miles. People thought it was an explosion. Dust choked the sky. Screams echoed across the neighborhood as slabs of concrete crushed furniture, beds, water tanks, lives. 10 people died. 4 of them were children. And just like that, the dream turned into a nightmare. The media frenzy ignited instantly. Cameras descended. Drone shots of the wreckage circled global platforms. Hashtags like #BurkinaCollapse, #TraoreHomesFail, and #FreeDeathHouses trended across Francophone Africa. Traoré was accused of incompetence, of playing politics with people's lives. Protesters took to the streets, some paid, others genuinely terrified. His political rivals seized the opportunity, calling for a full investigation and even impeachment. But what few knew was that it was all going according to plan. The Steel Circle's plan. The collapse had been triggered using a remote vibration device hidden beneath the central foundation of Building Block G, planted weeks earlier during a routine inspection. The timing had been chosen to coincide with peak media coverage. The goal wasn't just to kill people, it was to kill faith. Faith in the free housing dream. Faith in Traoré's leadership. Faith in the future of Burkina Faso. That night, as he visited the site of the collapse, Captain Traoré knelt in the dust beside the rubble. He ran his hand over a broken child's sandal. Around him, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Security guards tried to push them back. But he stood, raised his hand, and addressed them directly. "This is not an accident," he said, voice cutting through the noise. "This is an attack on justice, on our people, and on the dignity of Africa itself. We will not stop. We will not retreat. And we will expose every single hand behind this sabotage." But even as he spoke those words, one question burned in his mind. Where was Aisha? And was she still alive? The collapse of Building Block G had rocked the country, but it had also cracked open a trail that led straight to the last person who had tried to stop it before it happened. Aisha Soar. Aisha was no ordinary engineer. She graduated top of her class at Ouagadougou Technical University, the daughter of a widowed tailor and a schoolteacher. She had turned down lucrative private sector offers to work in the public housing program because, as she told her colleagues, "I don't want to build mansions for men who already own 10. I want to build dignity for those who've never had a front door." It was her commitment to detail that first raised red flags. 3 weeks before the collapse, Aisha had conducted a surprise quality test at Building Block G. She noted that the cement was brittle, the metal rods had inconsistent thickness, and the foundation felt suspiciously shallow. She made a full report and submitted it directly to her supervisor. But the next day, her laptop was gone from her site office. Then her supervisor told her not to worry so much, insisting the materials had been upgraded. The following morning, she received a phone call. A soft voice, female, said only, "Your hands are touching something dangerous. If you care about your family, stop digging." She didn't flinch. Instead, she backed up all her notes, photographs, and soil test results to a USB drive and gave it to her younger brother Malik, a computer science student in Koudougu. "Don't open this unless I disappear," she told him. She disappeared 2 days later. Traoré received word through an informant inside the housing ministry that Aisha had been intercepted on her way home from the site. Her phone was found, smashed and discarded in a storm drain. Her car had been seen near Zone 9's western gate, then vanished from all traffic cams. There were no security alerts. No evidence of a struggle. Just silence. But what the Steel Circle hadn't planned for was Malik. Terrified but determined, The young man uploaded the encrypted data to a private cloud and then contacted the president's cybersecurity office using a discreet public tip line Traoré had set up months earlier. He didn't reveal his name, just the file and the phrase Aisha had used in her final message to the president. Check the roots beneath your feet. The file, once decrypted, was explosive. It contained time-stamped photos showing how shipments labeled as reinforced cement were switched at midnight with substandard bags from an unregistered third-party supplier. One video, shaky but clear, captured workers hurriedly swapping steel rods behind the storage hangars. Even more damning was a list of names: senior officials in the Ministry of Works and Housing, 2 logistics contractors, and 1 assistant to a real estate tycoon who had visited the Zone 9 site just a week before the collapse. The evidence was enough to spark arrests. Traoré authorized a series of coordinated raids across Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso. In less than 48 hours, 11 individuals were detained, including 2 deputy directors who had signed the falsified inspection reports. The headlines shifted. Housing scandal deepens. Traoré declares war on internal saboteurs. Engineers' secret files uncover criminal network. Where is Aisha Soar? Despite the pressure, Traoré refused to rest. He had trusted the system to deliver hope, and the system had allowed itself to be bought. In a national address, he didn't dodge responsibility. He didn't blame lower ranks. He faced the camera with tired eyes but a firm voice. We trusted the wrong hands, and good people have died. But I promise this to the families of Zone 9, we will rebuild stronger. And to those who tried to destroy us from within, your time is over. You will not win. Not here. Not in Burkina Faso. Behind the scenes, his intelligence officers were now tracking a new lead. 2 security camera stills, blurred but usable, showed Aisha's car crossing the outer checkpoint of Ouagadougou on the night she disappeared. It was heading west, toward the Guinean border. The driver was a man, a known. Sunglasses at night. A pattern began to emerge. Traoré's lead investigator, Commandant Bila, believed Aisha had been abducted and taken across the border, possibly to keep her out of reach until the plan unfolded fully, until the public outcry was too loud for the president to recover. If we find her alive, Bila warned, we can dismantle the entire operation from the inside. She saw everything. She documented it. She was their biggest threat. A manhunt began. Plainclothes agents fanned out across border towns. Satellite pings were requested. Interpol was alerted with a soft probe, not officially recognizing her as kidnapped to avoid tipping off the conspirators. But no matter how far they searched, the trail kept going cold. Until a coded message appeared on a private developer forum on the dark web. Package in Tenkedogo has been moved. Relocated to dorm room. Ghana safe. It was short, meaningless to most. But to Bila, dorm room was a code name linked to an old CIA black site once operated by a mercenary security firm in northern Ghana. Now defunct, or so they thought. A special recovery mission was prepared. In the middle of all this, Traoré received a package. No return address. No note. Just a flash drive. When decrypted, it contained a shaky video clip. It showed Aisha in a dimly lit room. Her hands bound. Her face bruised. She looked into the camera and whispered, "Tell the president, they built the collapse. It wasn't nature. It wasn't failure. It was murder." The news of the building collapse in Zone 9 had already sent shockwaves across Burkina Faso. But when Captain Ibrahim Traoré received the video of Aisha, alive, beaten, and confirming sabotage, it moved the crisis into uncharted territory. This was no longer a policy failure. It was a premeditated act of political warfare. And it was working. In the days following the collapse, fear overtook the public. Many families refused to move into their newly built homes. Some demanded their old slum spaces back, choosing instability over death. Rumors flooded WhatsApp groups that more homes were ticking time bombs, that foreign engineers had warned the government but were silenced, that Traoré's housing plan is a mass grave project in disguise. Though most of these claims were manufactured by the Steel Circle's paid influencers and bloggers, the panic they generated was real. Even Traoré's inner circle began to fracture. At a high-level cabinet meeting, the Minister of Infrastructure, who had once championed the housing initiative, suggested suspending the entire project until further notice. Suspending it? Traoré shot back. That's exactly what they want. With all due respect, Captain, the minister replied cautiously, we have families afraid to enter their homes and regional governors calling for inquiries. We're losing public confidence. Traoré didn't raise his voice, but the steel in his tone was unmistakable. I don't lead by fear. I lead by principle. And I won't abandon our people because cowards planted death into our foundations. The room fell silent, but he knew the minister wasn't wrong. The public had turned. The media was relentless. Foreign outlets were now picking up the story, reporting that Burkina Faso's radical housing experiment had resulted in catastrophe. Protesters gathered outside the National Assembly demanding accountability. Even opposition leaders who had previously ignored the housing program suddenly found a new political lifeline. And in the heart of all this chaos, a second building collapsed, this time in Zone 6B. Though there were no fatalities, the damage was extensive. An elderly couple was rescued from under a fallen ceiling beam, bruised and terrified. Once again, the materials used in construction were found to be compromised. Now, Traoré faced a grim reality. 2 collapses in less than a month, a missing engineer held hostage, public confidence fading, and a media war he was losing. That evening, alone in his study, Traoré stared out the window at the stars above Ouagadougou. Was he wrong to dream so big? Was he too stubborn to accept defeat? Then his eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk. A boy in ragged clothes smiling in front of a completed housing unit, holding a sign that read, Merci, President. J'ai une maison. Thank you, President. I have a home. He wasn't wrong, but he had underestimated the depth of his enemy's reach. It was time to go on the offensive. The next morning, Traoré addressed the nation. Dressed in plain clothes, standing at a site where families were still moving into their new homes, he looked directly into the camera. My fellow citizens, I have always told you the truth, even when it hurt. Today, I will do so again. The recent collapses are not the result of bad planning or rushed construction. They are the result of sabotage. Deliberate acts by individuals who fear progress and hate justice. These attacks are not just against my government. They are attacks on every Burkinabe family that dares to dream of a better life. I will not suspend the program. I will clean it. We will rebuild every compromised house, and we will prosecute every single traitor involved in this betrayal of trust. The speech was powerful, but words were no longer enough. Action had to follow. And so it did. Traoré deployed elite units to arrest more suspects linked to the procurement fraud. A secret audit team, operating under military protection, began working night and day to examine all housing materials nationwide. They exposed a vast web of bribery and material laundering stretching to 3 neighboring countries. But most critical of all, he launched Operation Black Foundation, a covert military rescue mission to retrieve Aisha from the Ghanaian safe house believed to be operated by a mercenary group hired by the Steel Circle. Meanwhile, intelligence agents traced anonymous financial donations flowing to social media accounts that had been spreading fake news. Many were linked to dummy corporations in Dubai and South Africa, corporations that, when investigated further, were all tied to the Steel Circle. The conspiracy was no longer a suspicion. It was a machine, and Traoré had now seen its gears. Still, the most powerful weapon in the enemy's arsenal remained: public opinion. With 2 collapses, manipulated footage, and expert testimonies bought with foreign cash, the Steel Circle had created a story the world believed: that the housing program was reckless and that Traoré was using poor citizens as lab rats for socialist experimentation. But there was one thing they hadn't counted on: that Aisha, even in captivity, was still fighting. That USB file she gave her brother had included more than just construction data. Hidden inside was a folder labeled Origin. It contained a voice recording, one she secretly made during a meeting where a construction supplier admitted being paid to swap out materials. And it ended with one damning line. They said it didn't matter. that by the time the houses collapse, Traoré would be gone. That clip was about to go viral, if she lived long enough to see it. Title: Bricks of Betrayal, The Plot Against Traoré. Chapter 6, The Firestorm of Public Opinion. Word count, 900. The video clip from Aisha's hidden origin folder exploded across Burkina Faso's digital space like a wildfire in dry season. Shared first on an anonymous Telegram channel, then reposted to Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and WhatsApp groups, the clip featured the unmistakable voice of a contractor laughing with an accomplice. They said it didn't matter, that by the time the houses collapse, Traoré would be gone. That one sentence ripped through the media fog like a knife. It reframed everything. The collapses were no longer accidents. They were murder attempts on both the people and the president. Within hours, citizen journalists, student groups, and digital activists rallied under a new banner, #JusticeForZone9. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Where just days earlier, Traoré was being blamed for careless housing, now people were asking, who planned this? Who wanted the homes to fail? And what? The president's communications team, seizing the momentum, released a full report detailing the findings from the forensic audits, naming companies, officials, and accounts involved. It included a press-friendly summary and interactive visuals to help ordinary citizens understand how the fraud worked, from procurement to payout. Radio stations discussed it. Churches preached about it. Imams prayed for justice. And across rural and urban areas alike, a sense of betrayal settled in, not against Traoré, but against the elites who had sold out the nation's dream. It was the perfect storm, but it was also dangerously volatile. In Ouagadougou, a crowd gathered outside the Ministry of Works and Housing demanding arrests. They carried banners with slogans like "Our blood is not for sale" and "Hands off our homes." Protesters tore down posters of corrupt politicians. One of the deputy ministers narrowly escaped lynching when he tried to sneak out through a back door. Traoré had to act quickly to prevent the anger from turning to violence. In an emergency press conference, he stood before the nation again. "We do not respond to corruption with chaos. We respond with truth, law, and courage. I understand your anger, but we must channel it to build, not destroy. That's how we win." He announced the immediate suspension of all government officials named in the scandal and promised open trials. He even invited international anti-corruption monitors to participate in the investigations, a bold move that stunned foreign observers. But behind the scenes, the firestorm was revealing something deeper. Traoré's team discovered that the Steel Circle had allocated over $10 million to influence public perception. The money had been spread across fake think tanks producing independent reports, content creators and influencers, strategically placed foreign journalists, political consultants hired to coach opposition figures. It was a multi-layered information war. And the battlefield wasn't just TV or radio, it was the minds of Burkinabe citizens. That's why Traoré made the next bold move. He brought the fight online. He launched a state-backed digital counter-campaign called Truth in the Brick, a multimedia initiative that explained, in clear and compelling language, how the homes were built, how they were sabotaged, and what steps were being taken to ensure safety going forward. Videos featured real families who lived in safe houses. Engineers explained how the new material inspections would work. Animation clips showed the journey of a fraudulent steel rod from import to collapse. But the crown jewel of the campaign came when Traoré appeared unannounced on a live stream hosted by a 19-year-old student influencer known as Mama Faso, who had previously been neutral but had started asking questions after the Zone 6B collapse. "Sir," she asked during the live stream watched by over 200,000 people, "how do we know this won't happen again?" Traoré leaned forward. "Because this time, I've seen the faces of those who wanted it to happen. And now, they've seen mine. We are not finished. We are just beginning. This is not just about homes. It's about who controls the future of our land, men who build or men who sell." It became the most shared video clip in the country's history. But the battle was far from over. Even as support for Traoré surged, foreign news agencies remained skeptical. One European outlet published a scathing editorial titled, Is Traoré manufacturing scandal to save his reputation? Inside Burkina Faso, most people dismissed it as propaganda. But it was a reminder that while the tide was turning locally, powerful forces outside the country were still working to tarnish his image globally. Inside Burkina Faso, most people dismissed it as propaganda. But it was a reminder that while the tide was turning locally, powerful forces outside the country were still working to tarnish his image globally. Then, a breaking development shook the nation again. Interpol issued a red notice for a French national named Philippe Dufour, CEO of one of the firms named in Aisha's files. Dufour had fled to Morocco 3 days after the Zone 9 collapse. Traoré's legal team filed an extradition request immediately. Simultaneously, a Burkinabe parliamentary committee released a finding that 1/3 of all state construction contracts between 2017 and 2022 had been funneled through shell companies tied to real estate interests, many of which were now part of the Steel Circle's operations. The conspiracy was deeper, older, and more international than anyone had imagined. And in the midst of it all, there was still no sign of Aisha's rescue. The video clip had confirmed she was alive, but her exact location remained unknown. Her brother Malik, now under state protection, gave an emotional interview to local media. "My sister stood for truth," he said. "If anything happens to her, let it be known, we will not stop." Neither would Traoré. He had already approved the final phase of Operation Black Foundation. In less than 72 hours, an elite unit would cross into Ghana to find the woman who had held the line when everyone else backed down. And when they brought her home, if they did, Traoré was going to make sure the entire world knew the truth about what had been done to his people in the shadows of greed. The conference room on the second floor of the Presidential Command Center was not ornate. There were no gold-framed portraits or velvet chairs. Just maps, satellite screens, communication dashboards, and a large metal table scarred from years of meetings. It was here at 2:15 in the morning that Captain Ibrahim Traoré assembled his war room. His most trusted operatives were seated: Colonel Naba, Intelligence Chief Bila, and the commander of the elite Red Hawk unit, Captain Ouedraogo. They all understood the stakes. Traoré stood at the head of the table, both hands resting on an open dossier. "This is no longer just a political crisis," he began. "It's a siege. Not with tanks or jets, but with contracts, cash, and criminals wearing neckties." He nodded to Colonel Naba, who tapped on the projector remote. A satellite image of northern Ghana appeared. "This," Naba said, "is the dorm room facility. Supposedly shut down 3 years ago after the last American-led operations in West Africa. But we've intercepted chatter that suggests it was reactivated by mercenary contractors, funded indirectly by a shell company linked to the Steel Circle." He clicked again, revealing an overhead view of a compound surrounded by dense bush, fences, and thermal readings of possible human presence. "Aisha is likely inside, possibly under sedation. They're keeping her alive because they want leverage. They still believe they can negotiate with us, force a media deal, maybe even a political settlement to stop the housing program." Traoré scoffed. "They don't understand who they're dealing with." He turned to Captain Ouedraogo. "You've studied the layout. Give me the plan." Ouedraogo, lean and razor-focused, stepped forward. "We insert 3 teams. Red Hawk Alpha breaches the northern perimeter. Bravo comes in from the south to cut power and communications. Charlie will recover the target and neutralize any threats on exit. And collateral? Minimal. No children. No civilians. This is a precision recovery." Traoré nodded. "Good. You leave at dusk." Then, turning to Bila, he asked the next question: "What happens the moment we bring her home?" Bila didn't hesitate. "We release every piece of evidence she's documented. Publicly. Globally. We go to the African Union. We file international criminal charges. We name names, not just of companies, but of the corrupt local and foreign officials backing them." There was silence for a moment. Then Traoré looked up. "We don't just rescue Aisha. We dismantle the entire machine." At dusk, the Red Hawk unit lifted off in 2 unmarked Black Eagle choppers. The air was thick with tension, but every soldier on board knew they were not just rescuing a person, They were reclaiming truth. Meanwhile, back in Ouagadougou, Traoré initiated Operation Mirror. It was a dual-track communications offensive. On one side, state media rolled out detailed stories exposing the depth of corruption in the housing procurement chain. On the other, social media was flooded with testimonies from real families living in the safe homes. Families who stood in front of cameras, keys in hand, praising the program for changing their lives. The stories were raw and powerful. A widow in Zone 4 who had lived in a mud shack for 17 years now owned a 3-bedroom house. A disabled war veteran who once slept under a market stall was now teaching carpentry in a government-built estate. These weren't numbers. They were faces. And while the world's media had spent the last month demonizing Traoré, the people were beginning to see him not just as a president, but as a protector. Still, the steel circle wasn't finished. Sensing their grip slipping, they activated a last-ditch maneuver, release forged documents claiming that Traoré had personally profited from construction contracts. The documents appeared suddenly on international blogs and were picked up by a French investigative platform known to be sympathetic to foreign corporate interests. It was a desperate lie, but in a digital age, lies spread faster than facts. Traoré's team immediately debunked the documents with verified financial audits, and soon after, one of the whistleblowers, who allegedly leaked the files, admitted to being paid to fabricate them. But the smear campaign had done what it was designed to do. Cause hesitation. Western investors began pulling back. The IMF froze a housing-related technical assistance grant, pending investigation. Local banks, fearing exposure, began quietly reviewing their involvement in previous housing loans. It was clear. If Aisha didn't return, and fast, this war might be lost without a single bullet fired. Hours later, at 2:46 a.m., Captain Ouedraogo's voice crackled through the encrypted comms. Package secured. Repeat, package secured. Exfil in 12 minutes. Cheers erupted in the war room. Traoré didn't cheer. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank God." She had survived. And with her survival came the final blow to the shadow empire that had tried to destroy a nation's hope. When the choppers touched down in Ouagadougou before sunrise, Traoré was already on the tarmac. Aisha emerged, supported by medics, tired but alive. Her first words when she saw him? They said no one would come. I told them he always shows up. He nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder. Now let's show the world who they really are. The sun had barely risen over Ouagadougou, but the entire nation was already awake. News had broken that engineer Aisha Sour was alive and back on Burkinabe soil. The woman whose disappearance had haunted the public conscience had returned, not broken, but stronger. Within 24 hours of her arrival, she recorded a nationwide broadcast, seated beside Captain Ibrahim Traoré. "I was taken because I asked the wrong questions," she said calmly. "Because I inspected the wrong cement bags. Because I refused to be silent." Then she dropped the bomb. "I recognized one of the men who interrogated me. He wasn't a foreign mercenary. He was someone I'd seen in meetings, at site visits, standing behind ministers." The camera zoomed slightly, capturing the raw weight of her revelation. One of our own. The country was shocked. Not just by the admission, but by the implications. Someone within the highest levels of the government, someone in Traoré's trusted circle, had betrayed them all. Traoré wasted no time. That same evening, he summoned a private council at the presidential compound. Only 7 people were in the room: his chief of staff, 2 senior military officers, the interior minister, the intelligence chief Bila, the head of security, and Aisha herself. She pointed at a photo array on the table and tapped her finger on one face. Hervé Dao, assistant to the Minister of Works. I saw him enter the dorm room facility. He gave orders. He wasn't just helping them, he was coordinating. Dao had been a quiet figure, efficient, low profile. He'd helped draft several housing logistics plans and handled correspondence between site engineers and the ministry. He wasn't on any watch list. Not until now. By dawn, the Presidential Guard had raided his villa in Zone Diplomatique. They found something disturbing. A secured laptop containing coded emails between Dao and a South African-based lobbying firm. One message read, Collapse will trigger doubt. Doubt will stall funding. Funding freeze gives us leverage to negotiate revised urban expansion policies. Push for decentralization. Remove Traoré. It was a strategic plan to cripple Traoré's housing revolution from within, not through a coup, but through economic and psychological warfare. They were trying to make the people lose faith. And Dao was the bridge between the steel circle and the government. Under interrogation, he cracked. "I didn't believe in the plan," he said. "I thought it was reckless. You were dismantling the old system too fast. You gave land to people who never owned it. You didn't leave space for compromise." He admitted to leaking housing inspection schedules, facilitating entry for foreign operatives, and even approving false compliance certificates to allow substandard materials through. But his most chilling confession? "I signed off the structural downgrade of Block G." Aisha turned pale. The collapse that had killed 10 people, the moment that had nearly buried the entire dream, wasn't just a result of bad cement. It was engineered from the inside. And Traoré? He felt the weight of every decision. He had built a government of speed and revolution. He had chosen loyalty over bureaucracy. But in his rush, he had given power to wolves in sheep's clothing. Still, he didn't lash out. He didn't scream. He did something colder. He called a national tribunal. In an unprecedented move, Traoré announced a live televised special hearing where the public could watch the confessions, the evidence, the cross-examinations. Transparency was no longer optional, it was now the weapon. When the trial began, citizens watched from cafes, classrooms, churches, and courtyards. Dao, dressed in a simple white shirt, was shown footage of his emails, his signed documents, and witness testimonies. "I believed I was saving the country from chaos," he said in court. "But I became chaos." It was a line that resonated. Over the course of 5 days, Burkina Faso watched the trial unfold. Ministers were summoned. Auditors gave detailed analysis. Independent engineers like Aisha presented how homes were built to code, until people like Dao altered the course. The revelations were damning. But something else happened, something Traoré had quietly hoped for. The people began to believe again. They saw a leader who didn't shield traitors. A system that didn't collapse into silence. A movement that stood not just on bricks, but on truth. Traoré knew this was more than a trial. It was a turning point. He ended the proceedings with a closing address. To betray a country is not just to take money or spill secrets. It is to kill hope. But what they didn't understand is that hope, when rooted in truth, does not die easily. This was not just a collapse of a building. It was an attempted collapse of belief. They failed. The audience in the courtroom stood and applauded. So did the families from Zone 9. So did thousands watching from homes built with real stone, real effort, and real integrity. Hervé Dao was sentenced to life in prison. But more importantly, his sentence became a message that Burkina Faso's future could not be bought, bribed, or betrayed. And as the crowd outside the National Assembly chanted Traoré's name, he stepped back into his armored vehicle and whispered to himself, "One Judas down. But how many more hide in the crowd?" Zone 9 had once stood as a symbol of progress, until the collapse, the panic, and the betrayal. Now it stood as a graveyard of trust. But Ibrahim Traoré was never one to let symbols stay broken. A week after the televised tribunal and the conviction of Hervé Dao, the president returned to the rubble where 10 lives were lost. This time, he wasn't in military uniform or surrounded by an entourage of aides. He came wearing a construction vest and boots, just like the workers who had once believed in the mission. Reporters tried to ask questions, but he waved them off gently. He wasn't there to speak. He was there to rebuild. The new phase of the housing program was officially launched that day, La Brique Hanit, the honest brick. It wasn't just a name. It was a movement. Every home built going forward would bear a gold-etched plaque near the doorway engraved with a promise. Constructed in truth. Protected by justice. A home for the future. The Honest Brick initiative came with sweeping reforms. Independent construction teams were to be hired through a transparent bidding system monitored by civil society watchdogs, religious leaders, and even student unions. Material sourcing was tracked in real time using blockchain-based logistics software developed by Burkinabe tech graduates. Families receiving the homes were now offered a 3-day quality inspection window. If any fault was found, the contractor would be fined and required to repair it before occupancy. Most revolutionary of all was the Open Brickyard program. Traoré ordered the government to create public brickmaking cooperatives in every major region. These cooperatives would train unemployed youth, ex-convicts, and single mothers in brick crafting, paying them fair wages while producing high-quality construction materials for public use. The same people who had been victims of poverty were now becoming architects of progress. The old real estate cartels sneered at the initiative. They mocked it as naive, unsustainable. But while they scoffed from glass towers, thousands of bricks began lining up on dusty plots, each shaped by hands that had once begged for food. And the people? They responded. In Wahiguya, locals formed neighborhood watch teams to guard construction sites at night, ensuring no sabotage took place. In Kédougou, artists began painting murals on newly completed houses, images of hope, of resistance, of unity. In Fada Ngourma, elders blessed construction sites with prayer and poured libations to honor the spirits of those lost in the collapse. Even critics in the opposition began softening their tone. A prominent opposition MP admitted on national radio, "I don't agree with all of Traoré's policies, but I cannot deny he listens. He learns. He fights." Yet, for every new foundation laid, Traoré felt the weight of the old wounds. He had personally met with every family affected by the collapse at Zone 9. He sat with grieving mothers, held children who had lost siblings, and made a vow to each of them. "I will not stop until justice builds you a new home." His engineers worked overtime to meet those promises. One mother, Adama Diallo, who had lost her daughter in the collapse, was given the honor of choosing the color for the first finished house in the new phase. She chose a soft yellow and named the home Binta's Light. It was her daughter's name. But the return to brick wasn't just about physical rebuilding. It was a spiritual, cultural restoration. In the heart of the Sahel, the mud brick home has always been more than shelter. It's been a symbol of identity, of family lineage, of survival, of ancestral memory. By reclaiming the brick from the greed of the elite, Traoré was reclaiming the soul of the nation. And he wanted the world to see it. He invited African journalists, not Western media, to tour the honest brick sites. Pan-African networks ran documentaries titled From Collapse to Courage and Burkina Faso's War for Housing Justice. Niger, Mali, and Chad sent delegations to study the model. Ghana, which had previously allowed the steel circle to operate within its borders, quietly revoked several construction permits and began internal reviews. Pressure was mounting across West Africa to hold real estate corruption accountable. Traoré knew the steel circle was wounded, but not defeated. Some of their CEOs had gone underground. Others were funding campaigns to paint him as an authoritarian for bypassing international development institutions. They launched new ghost companies under different names, trying to re-enter the market from the shadows. But this time, Burkina Faso was watching. One night, as the president walked the foundations of a future housing estate with only his security detail and a flashlight, he paused. There, on one of the newly dried bricks, a child had written in charcoal, "C'est pour nous, pas pour yous." This is for us, not for them. He smiled, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. He knew the war wasn't over, but the people had picked up their tools. And as long as the people were building, not just homes, but trust, unity, and pride, the enemies of progress could never truly win. The new housing complex on the eastern edge of Ouagadougou was nearing completion. It was called Citadel of the People. Not because it had fences or guards, but because it stood as a monument to the strength of ordinary citizens. Brick by brick, it had risen from the ashes of betrayal, powered not by foreign loans or elite developers, but by faith, sacrifice, and a leader who refused to bow. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood beneath a tamarind tree at the edge of the site, gazing at rows of colorful rooftops in the morning sun. The scent of wet cement and fresh paint filled the air. He had a document folder under his arm, a file labeled Final Phase Blueprint. It wasn't a construction plan. Not this time. It was a new social contract. Inside were the designs for Phase 3 of the free housing program, a plan not just to build homes, but to build communities, with integrated schools, cooperatives, health posts, clean water systems, and communal farms. The homes would no longer be just walls and roofs. They would be villages of opportunity. But this last phase was also the most dangerous, because it meant total independence from the real estate cartels. It meant decentralizing land authority to local councils. It meant banning speculative land banking by foreign investors. It meant outlawing rent gouging in urban centers and creating public land trusts that belonged to the people forever. And for the Steel Circle, this was the final threat. They had failed to kill Traoré. They had failed to stop Aisha. They had failed to destroy the public's trust. But they had one last bullet left. As Traoré walked toward the housing site to address the workers, a man approached from the crowd. Dressed like a foreman, clipboard in hand, sweat on his brow. Ordinary in every way, except the hidden blade tucked into the seams of his boot. The plan was simple: blend in, move close, strike once, then vanish. He had been paid in advance, $150,000 wired to an offshore account. His handler had told him, cut off the head and the body dies. But he hadn't counted on the crowd. When the assassin made his move, he didn't get far. A grandmother saw the glint of the blade. A teenager noticed the sudden movement. And in seconds, 5 construction workers tackled him to the ground before he could even reach the president's shadow. Traoré turned, his calm eyes landing on the man pinned to the ground. Another buyer of Burkina Faso's future, he murmured. The crowd cheered, not for revenge, but for resilience. Later that evening, as security forces interrogated the would-be killer, a shocking confession emerged. The man had been a former site engineer, one who had lost his contract when the open brickyard program eliminated middlemen. He had been contacted by a foreign number promising wealth if he could end the madness. They were still trying to end it, even now, even after everything. But what the Steel Circle never understood was that this was no longer just Traoré's movement. It belonged to the people. Aisha, now fully recovered, led a national engineering task force with branches in every region. Malik, her younger brother, helped develop a mobile app that allowed citizens to monitor the housing quality in real time. It became known as My Brick, My Right. Communities began holding monthly house checks, where neighbors inspected each other's homes to prevent any future corner cutting. What began as a government project had transformed into a people's revolution. But Traoré still had one more announcement to make. At a press conference held inside one of the new schools built beside the Citadel of the People, he stood before journalists and citizens with the final phase blueprint in hand. He took a deep breath. This is not just the final phase of the housing program. It is the beginning of something greater. We are not just giving our people homes. We are returning them to the land, to dignity, to possibility. And to ensure this work outlives me, I am proposing a national housing constitution amendment that will enshrine free, quality housing as a permanent constitutional right for every Burkinabe citizen. No president after me will be able to undo it. No foreign corporation will ever again hold our dignity hostage. The room went silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. Not just clapping, but cheering, weeping, hugging. Men who had built walls now stood tall with pride. Women who once squatted in abandoned shops now knew their children would sleep under safe roofs, protected by law, not luck. It would take another year to pass the amendment, another 5 to finish the last round of construction. But the blueprint had been laid. That night, Traoré sat alone in his study, the final blueprint spread across his desk. He traced a finger along the line that separated Zone 9 from the Citadel. From collapse to creation. From betrayal to belief. He glanced out the window where, for the first time in weeks, children were playing in the streets again. No fear, no anger, just laughter. A soft knock came at the door. It was Aisha. She smiled, setting down 2 cups of herbal tea. You kept the promise, she said. Traoré nodded slowly. No, we did. And outside, beneath the stars of a country once looted and left for dead, 1,000 new homes stood strong, whispering the same truth into the Sahel wind. You may destroy a brick, but you can never bury a people who remember how to build.